Welcome to Divorce Explained. We're really excited this week to have a guest who is a psychotherapist, a registered psychotherapist, who specializes in trauma and childhood wounds. And it's perfect because our topic this week is how betrayal trauma may affect your divorce. So we're really excited to have with us Stephanie Boucher. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Why don't we start by having you tell listeners a little bit about yourself? I know that you specialize in betrayal, and how did you come to focus your practice on that, and what are the types of cases that you work with?
So I mean, I've been in the mental health field for over 10 years. I worked about 7 years with the Military Family Services as a counselor, and so we often worked with spouses there. And unfortunately, infidelity and betrayal is something that's quite prevalent in the military families, maybe just kind of out of the setting of their lifestyles, right? Like a lot of um, them deploring out and then coming back into their homes. And so it is something that we've had to support families into, as well as just kind of trying to help them connect with each other in a way that helps them move forward or to separate, right? And so it is something that I faced a lot during my work there. And so I opened up the Mindful Loft about 2 years ago, where we decided to focus on betrayal trauma and childhood wounds. And these are two categories of relational trauma. Relational trauma is the trauma that we get out of wounds that come from relationships. So in childhood, it can mean kind of having a neglectful parent or a verbally abusive parent. And in obviously in relationships, it can mean betrayal. Betrayal doesn't have to just mean infidelity, but in the most part, it is infidelity.
So
And
it's
how
interesting. Betrayal trauma,
Yeah.
is something that we lawyers, first of all, rarely ever hear about. I
Yeah.
mean, I think you're probably the first person that's ever introduced me to the term betrayal trauma,
Hmm.
but it makes total sense. Somebody who invests 5, 10, 25 years of their life into a relationship, they give them everything. They give
Hmm.
them their time. They give them their money. They give them children. They have children in common. They share a
Yeah.
bed. And then they find that there's this mammoth breach of
Yeah.
trust. And then they end up in our office.
Yeah.
And we try to be lawyers. We try to give advice. We
Yeah.
try to follow instructions. And there's this thing that's out there looming where we lawyers see the person and we see that they're not totally there, and that the information we give isn't being received, and that the information that they give us seems to be clouded.
Yeah.
And so along comes your concept of betrayal trauma. And give me an idea on how do I address that in a preliminary fashion with a client when I am sensing that there's a disconnect in their ability to receive information and convey information. And how do I even broach it in a way that's polite and politically correct?
Hmm. To understand that, I would first have to walk you through what happens in betrayal trauma, because there is a process that is inevitable. What betrayal does is it takes kind of like the carpet from under our feet and sets us into a shock state. And so that's stronger than us. That's the nervous system going into shock. Like you said, right? Like someone that I've put all my trust into, broke down all my walls for, share a life with, is suddenly someone who I is not the image that I had in my head and who I decided to lean on. And so we have a stage of shock, anger, denial, sadness, eventually acceptance, right? And they go into that process inevitably. And so first thing to know how to interact with these clients is to know that that exists within them. And so part of what I would inform clients about is to find stability in an unstable time in their lives, because they question everything. So if I can't trust the very person I put all of my trust into, I start to question myself, right? What about my decision making? I thought I put all my trust into this person. I was wrong about this person, the person I trusted the most in the world. Um, turned out to be not so trustworthy. So does that mean the same for my best friend, my parents, my siblings, right? My colleagues. And so they're in a very unstable part in their lives. And then they have to make huge decisions about their lives in legal proceedings. And so to your question, I think it would be to first assess where they're at in terms of their state. And so if you're noticing kind of struggling to understand the information, it would be to break it down a little bit in a way that someone who is in hypervigilant state of their nervous system can take, right? Sometimes it's just about taking a little bit of information at a time and maybe encouraging them to lean on maybe someone who they truly think is a safe person, right? And so I'm going to create this like fake scenario here, but let's say that there's infidelity between a couple and the husband's been unfaithful to the wife, to find maybe the person that they believe in the world is the most trustworthy to lean for support on. And so that person then becomes like, I always draw the image of like a boat that's like really shaky, and suddenly betrayal happens, and that makes the sense of like losing the gate around the boat. And so like I can fall off the boat. I have no stability. So you want to find that one person that's kind of like a pillar, like a rope in the middle of the boat that I can hang on to, so that I can have at least a little bit of stability, enough to understand what's going on and make decisions. And so long answer to your question is, one, to give small bites at a time of information depending on their state, right? If you're noticing that they're speaking fast or struggling to grasp information. And the second would be to encourage them to find that person that they can trust to help them understand everything.
Now, it sounds like from what you're saying, and it makes sense to me that, there's different types of betrayal. Like when we hear the word betrayal, I think the automatic one people think of is infidelity.
Yeah.
But it does sound to me like, from what you're saying, that betrayal in a lot of ways could just be any sort of breach of trust.
Yes.
Could be financial, maybe. It could be something else altogether. And so what are some of the different types of betrayal, and do they have the same impact on somebody, or does it depend on, what type of betrayal it is? Maybe infidelity impacts people a certain way and financial betrayal another way. How do they affect people?
They affect people differently, but they all have a commonality as well, right? So for instance, infidelity will bring up three main injuries to the person. And so there's what we call the attachment injury, which is kind of losing that person that I've put my entire life into, right? And then there's the psychological injury, which goes into kind of revisiting history of like the moments that I saw things differently, but now I have to see them in a different way. And then there's what we call the sexual injury, which is the self-esteem part of it all, right? Was I not good enough? Do I not, it kind of questions a lot of people's like self-image. And so that's specific to infidelity. But there's similar things that might be attached to it in different kinds of betrayal, but there can be, workplace betrayal, where you've relied your identity to a place of work. There can be, with childhood wounds, parental betrayal. Even infidelity can affect children who then into adulthood struggle to trust a relationship after them having witnessed a betrayal themselves. So there's definitely in a couple, there's that financial betrayal that can happen. It's any situation in which you invested a lot of trust into that wasn't the case. And now we have to reassess our ability to trust others and our ability to trust our decision making. And a lot of times make huge changes in our lives, right? With a financial betrayal, with a workplace or from an institution. A lot of people are facing betrayal politically. And so it's just something where I invest a lot, and it has a huge impact on my life that I have to question everything about myself and what I've been leaning on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it causes someone to question their own judgment, maybe even that they trusted somebody and what they thought was the case isn't the case. Yeah. And so it undermines their self-esteem or self-confidence and trust in their own intuition and judgment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where does the analysis of objective versus subjective come into this? And what do I mean by that, Stephanie? It's over the years, I have found a lot of cases where the actual trauma, the event, is the same in two cases that I have at the exact same time. And the ages are the same, the ethnicities are the same, the community is the same, but yet in both cases, and I'm going to just use the example of adultery, in both cases, one person reacts to the adultery in a very extreme way. And the other person, they're bothered by it. They've ended the relationship, but they've moved on.
Yeah.
And yet the exact same facts are the same. And yet I don't understand why it is that some people have a real pronounced negative reaction and others have what I would perceive to be a overly calm reaction. And who am I to judge one's reaction? Is one extreme? Is one unrelated to the extent or severity of the event? Is there an objective reaction to betrayal that one can measure against and go, well, that person is pathologically underreactive and that person is pathologically overreactive?
That's a really good question. And the answer is not simple, but there's so many factors at play here. I would say one factor, I suppose, is the intensity of the attachment to the other person. And so how much have I been leaning on to someone? Or was it too much of a leaning on to? Was it a codependent relationship where now that this person is gone, I have no identity. And so my impact is a lot bigger. Other things I would say are attachment styles. So I won't go too far into it, but attachment style in therapy world just means, how did our upbringings impact the way we respond to the world? And so I would say that people that are securely attached are able to manage their emotions, and they are able to know that they can kind of walk through a challenge in a way that they can stay a bit more regulated. They know where their trust should lie. Of course, sometimes we're wrong, right, because of betrayal, but it doesn't set them off in a way where they can question their own ability to trust or to make decisions. Now, people who have more inconsistencies in their lives with their parents, where parents were sometimes reliable and sometimes not, it creates in the nervous system this hypervigilance, right? Because sometimes my parent is reliable and sometimes it's not. I'm gonna stay, on high alert to make sure that I can observe when they're around and when they're not. And that high alertness stays into our adulthood. And so it creates a big emotional response into people because it's not sustainable to be on high alert all the time, to in fight or flight. And so it's really a thing of the nervous system and how people have learned to either calm it down or have always just had to stay in that fight or flight survival mode. And that creates a lot of bursts of emotions. What am I going to do? Like, what's, I can't survive through this. Like, I have no idea what I can, like, if I can survive with this person, how could you do this to me? And so I would say it has a big thing to do with how people regulate their emotions. And typically that is built upon in our upbringing. Not that we're doomed, because if we're someone who does have like an anxious attachment style, there are ways that we can learn to soothe in that.
Now, Steve and I are obviously not psychotherapists, but we do deal a lot with clients who have been betrayed and are affected by it and have to make these major life-altering decisions as we take them through the separation and divorce process. And you mentioned that, for us to do things with the client in more bite-sized or manageable steps can be helpful to them. What are some other tips? Because, often we have clients that could be at various points in, you mentioned the stages of working through it. So, and we're not trained specifically in psychotherapy or betrayal, so we may or may not be able to recognize which stage they're in. And often we have clients who are not very good at emotionally regulating themselves. So what advice do you have for lawyers in our situation to help these people who are really struggling get through the process and make these important decisions without, regretting the decision because they were affected negatively by, the betrayal trauma impacting their decision making?
I mean, one big one is maybe to refer them to a therapist or suggest it, right? It's all you can do. You can't force anyone to go to therapy, but just to suggest that they get therapeutic support so that they can learn how to regulate their emotions and make decisions that benefit them in the future, right? And that aren't necessarily emotionally based. And another thing is part of it is a bit out of your hands, and so I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourselves as lawyers. Is that it is an inevitable stage that they go through, but it would be just to offer a bit of empathy, a bit of a soft voice. The nervous system is contagious, and I'm sure when you guys hear a client that's like up here with their emotions, that you can feel that tension. And so the same thing goes for the opposite, right? If I speak to you in a soft voice and I bring the energy down, then we can have a conversation here, because right here we can't listen to each other. We're both in fight or flight. And so to just bring the energy down and kind of talk it through. And that's the best thing I would say in that moment, because of course, I would assume that you guys are trying your best to give the information and work with the client, but part of it I think is a bit just part of the process and out of your hands in that way, right? Is just to try to calm the energy down a little bit, offer them referrals for therapy, encourage them to discuss things with their most trusted person so that they can have a source of stability at home. But even us as therapists, right, when we give suggestions, they go off on their own, and we just hope that they take it.
That example that you gave earlier about the boat and the rope in the middle of the boat, it just I had a light bulb moment, Stephanie. In the last 30 years when I've been practicing family law with parenting issues, we often hear at least one parent, often the mother, say, "I want custody of my children." And over the years we've heard the father say, "I want joint custody," or shared parenting. And it takes me back to your comment about the rope in the middle of the boat. I'm wondering, is it possible that from betrayal trauma, some parents who are going through a divorce treat the children as the rope in the boat? And that might be one of the reasons why we have so many of these high conflict parenting cases, alienation cases, estrangement, gatekeeping. The list goes on. But at the end of the day, there are countless number of cases every day in court where the parents are fighting over the kids. And I wonder, what is driving that? Okay, some of it is maybe there is some problems with parenting. Maybe there are some problems with addiction or alcoholism or domestic violence, but not all of them. There's a lot of cases where the two parents are, generally speaking, mentally stable, good people, but the parents are in such utter conflict. And the children sometimes, and I ask the question, are they the rope in the boat?
I suppose they could be. Because while I'm not in your field, the first thing that came up in my mind is that could also be a plea for some sort of control. And I don't even say control in the negative way. We need a bit of control in our lives, right, to feel stable. And that is the most, separation and infidelity or divorce is one of the most unstable things we can go through, destabilizing. And so the first thing that comes to mind, and maybe it does align with the rope, right, is this thing where I need some sort of stability in my life, some sort of consistency. Now, I don't know how fair that is to the children to have such a responsibility to be the stability, right? And to kind of be that source of stability for the parents. And while of course I imagine and that parents want custody and that's genuine, I do suppose that to find a more appropriate rope so that it doesn't add pressure onto the children to be the source of stability for parents. And that's
If I
simply that,
may,
yeah,
yeah, if I may follow up with that,
yeah.
if I'm sensing it, if I'm a lawyer, I have no
Mm-hmm.
training whatsoever in psychology,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm sensing a parent is very possessive of the children in the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be because that is, they are treating the children as either their grab at some stability or potentially them seeking revenge for what trauma they suffered. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a way of possibly sort of leveling the playing field. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you by
Mm-hmm.
withholding the kids from you. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
sensing that, how would you suggest I deal with it?
Mm. That's a tough one because that would be something that I would address in a therapy session. Once I've gained someone's trust, right? Once we've had like a nice working relationship where I can go there, right? Because I can imagine that would to point it out directly would bring up someone's walls, right? And their defenses, I imagine. And so I suppose maybe in a more gentle way to question to help people challenge their motivations, right? And to have them kind of reflect on their values. Why are we doing this? And to make sure that we're making decisions based on our values and based on our future goals, and to maybe have them reflect on that. But again, that is I would suppose a lawyer going the extra mile, which is great. But that would be one way, right? Is to like say, like, are we making decisions that are based on our values and what we want for the future, or are we basing it on just trying to feel a bit in control of our lives because we're feeling a bit shaky?
Now, you mentioned that one type of betrayal trauma could be that one of your parents cheated on the other parent,
Mhm.
and that impacted you in your childhood. And so you carried a betrayal trauma into adulthood from that. What do you say to parents who involve their children in these types of things? I've had clients where the one of the parents took it upon themselves to mention to the children that the other parent had cheated on them, so this divorce is all daddy's fault or all mommy's fault because of that. And I mean, obviously it's inappropriate for them to do so,
Yeah.
but it's not that uncommon, unfortunately, for parents to do that. And so maybe if you could help listeners understand the effect on their children when they do that, I think that could be really helpful.
Absolutely. It has a huge negative effect. And while there, obviously it has to be said at some point, that depends on like when the appropriate age is to declare that, what happened because children get curious about what happened to their parents. But again, so ask yourself the motivation and the state you're in, right? And so if it's kind of in a spiteful, resentful moment to kind of get the kids to align with you, that's one thing. But if it's just to inform them because they deserve to know what's going on, that's a different thing. And to let them ask questions and to know that they're supported. The long-term impact, it can be right that anxious attachment style because they experience for themselves, someone that they trust, uh, you know, betray the family, and in turn when someone kind of goes like, well, he cheated on mommy and in a very spiteful way, that also takes away like that rope, right? Because the children are also looking for a rope in that moment, and so that for them doesn't provide them any type of stability because they have the instability of the betrayal and then the instability of the resentment. And so long term, I've seen people, clients that come to me because they struggle in relationships and friendships where they're accused all of their romantic partners of infidelity. Don't let them have friends of the opposite gender, or right, it comes out in a bit of insecurity in relationships, because that the relationship, the most important relationship we see before we're adults, is the one of our parents. And so that is the long-term impact. And not to say that when betrayal happens that this is exactly what can happen to children every time. um, we can rectify that by giving them so much support and some stability in an unstable time, so that the nervous system can learn to stay calm in the chaos.
In a lot of the high conflict parenting cases that I have seen, there are often therapists and parenting assessors involved. And having read so many of these therapy notes and assessment reports, there's something that keeps coming up, and that is that parents who are going through a divorce shall not share with the children the details of the divorce.
Mm.
And whether that's infidelity, whether that has to do with mental health problems, whether that's to do with financial problems, there's this sort of axiom that goes, whatever that is,
Yeah.
the kids should not know. And I guess my question to you, Stephanie, is if betrayal may be what causes a divorce and there are children involved, is the victim of betrayal then thereby committing a betrayal on their children by not being honest with them? Because that would then prompt them to tell the children what happened and why mommy and daddy are not together.
Mm-hmm.
But if the person that's the victim of betrayal then follows what the axiom is, that you
Mm-hmm.
shall not share this with the kids,
Yeah.
are they not now in effect betraying the kids, who will one day eventually find out that what the victim parent said was false?
That's a good question. I think it comes to what provides the least versus most amount of stability. And so separation and divorce is already a very destabilizing situation for children. And so, and I mean, I'm going to factor in age, right? What age can a kid hear, well into their teenage years, or younger, ages from 1 to, I'm not a child therapist, but I'm just going to throw a number out there, like 1 to 14, let's say. And so I hear what you're saying, right? That it can be a shock to then hear details that weren't given to us in our upbringing, when it happened in that moment. But I would say that the priority is stability. And so I think it would double the betrayal in the moment for young children to hear of first the separation, and then the betrayal, the infidelity. And so I do agree with not sharing these details. Sure, it will be, kind of an upsetting um, moment for someone to hear later in life the exact details, but we have to factor in maturity, stability, and to prioritize the support that the kids needs in that time.
Well, Stephanie, this information, quite frankly, is remarkable. I'm so glad that that you've started your organization, your clinic, and I am very grateful that you do provide services, taking your experience from working with the military and bringing it into the sphere of family life, separation and divorce. Leanne and I have seen far too many people that would be very much served by having the services, the advice, and the supports that you've described. And if it wasn't for you, I don't think I would have thought about betrayal trauma in the way that we've discussed in the last half hour. So I just want to say thank you very much, Stephanie, for providing the services that you do, and for sharing your history and your ongoing work with families on Divorce Explained. And we look forward to hearing more good news from you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks to our listeners. We will see you here again next time on Divorce Explained.